people talk a lot about like building brands and what a brand is, etc. Like to me, a brand was always just the collection of touch points that you have with your customer, potential customer. And your domain name is certainly one of the touch points. And when they go to your website, seeing your domain name is a big touch point, or seeing the domain name on an ad or hearing it on an ad. And so, we always just said, like, what are the things that we can control, and let's optimize that. So we would always plot out every point in the customer journey and try to make each point as delightful and on brand and special and enticing as possible. And, some of that was obvious, like with the box and the unpacking. That ended up going way more viral than we would have ever expected.
Yeah, I remember those videos launched where it's like the expansion videos when people open the bags. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the domain name, it's hard to quantify. It's not like people like, oh, well, you were at .com, so I went to you, or
right.
.co or something like that. Like, it's another one of those touch points, and the collection of those touch points are what your brand becomes. And I think we have and had a very special brand, and we wanted to keep reinforcing that to the highest degree we could.
But are you still master of your domain?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the critically acclaimed and Emmy-nominated Master of Your Domain YouTube series. Thrilled to be joined here with my good friend, Philip Krim. Welcome, Philip.
Thanks.
Philip is a jack of all trades, has done a lot of different things. He's currently the co-founder and CEO of Mont Climate, which is a group focused on building and investing in climate-related companies. Prior to that, Philip was also one of the co-founders and CEO of Casper, the mattress company, and has a lot of great stories. So welcome, and thanks for doing this, Philip.
Thanks for having me, Rob. Excited to chat.
It's really my pleasure. Cool. Well, look, maybe I know we kind of started chatting about this more about on the Casper side, et cetera, but do you want to take a second to just talk about what you're doing right now with Montauk Climate and the types of work you guys are getting into?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Montauk Climate's been super fun. We're a team of 8 folks now, and we think about companies that we should build in the climate space. So we're focused around the energy transition, decarbonization, and sustainability trends that are happening in this world, and think about more technologies and companies and products that are necessary to help accelerate and accomplish goals around that. So it's super fun. I'm learning a ton. I obviously didn't come from this space, but I think this space is one that's critically important and one that is really at the inflection of kind of the Wild West. We're still trying to figure it all out, and there's a lot of really great founders building really cool companies. And I encourage anyone that's looking for a space within the venture ecosystem to look at climate, because it's just really fun, really big opportunities, and I think some really significant companies are going to come out of this space over the next 5 and 10 years.
Amazing. Yeah, and it's cool to see how you're taking all you've learned across all your different companies in the past and now applying it towards this space, which has always kind of been up and coming, but now feels like there's a lot of momentum around building around climate. So it's great to see. And from what I understand, the Earth needs some of these companies to succeed. So that's great to see what you're doing, man. Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about Casper. Do you mind kind of talking a little bit about the early days? And I know there were 5 co-founders. Is that right? Back in the day. Just like the early formation, how you guys got started, and kind of like the founding story there.
Of course. And you're right, 5 co-founders. And in almost every regard, having 5 co-founders is amazing. And I love my co-founders. We had a great time. We had a great experience working together. I would say the exception is when you're trying to name your company. Having 5 co-founders is not ideal. So I know that that's what we're here to talk about. And naming Casper was certainly an exercise in very emotional, vocal discussions of trying to come up with something where you're not compromising on a name, but you find something that you all have equal conviction can be something great. And working a startup is like naming your child. It's hard. It's something you're gonna have to live with forever, and it's high stakes. But it was fun. And in our early days, we had no idea what we were gonna call this business. We were working on it. We kind of gave ourselves a deadline on when we had to come up with a date. And as we were having these brainstorming sessions leading up to that date, they were getting more and more intense and more vitriolic, but we knew we had to name the business in order to move forward. And ultimately, we're all very happy that we landed on Casper. And it wasn't like a no-brainer consensus move, but it was one where we could all see the appeal. At the time we were working with a branding agency, Red Antler, and the team over there was great. And they really helped us keep level heads around how to think about names. And, it's not obvious when you're naming a company and a brand, how you should think about that, how you should approach it. At one point in time, we thought we would call this Dukes. We had, a bunch of names that we thought we were going to go with, but when we sat with it, it just didn't feel right. And ultimately, we sat with Casper. We loved it. We started as CasperSleep.com because we didn't have Casper.com as a domain name. But the brand immediately started to feel like something that we could create that was wet clay that we could mold into something that would be really unique and special. And so what we went with.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. It's like, of course, it's such an important decision, but also it's just you need to make a decision, right? And then it starts to become a thing, right? Let's like once we decide on the name, then we can actually start building around it. You start to give it a personality and a life and a brand, design, etc. Even if it's not like a name that everyone agreed on at the start. And it sounds like you guys maybe were duking it out in the back room as you're getting the name process figured out.
Yes. Well, shout out to one of my co-founders, Luke Sherwin, who was always probably the most opinionated and most vocal with his thoughts on things. But we were able to be constructive through that process, and we all got to a place where we had conviction that Casper was the right name for us, and it worked out to be great.
A bit of an aside, but I'm curious, like with 5 co-founders, Ro, we had the three of us, and at times that was even like, it could create tension, right? When people have different opinions about different things. But with 5, I imagine there were more opportunities for that. Like, did you guys come in with complementary skills at the founding level where you maybe weren't stepping on each other's toes all the time? Or like, how did you kind of think about distribution of like where people were actually spend their time and the autonomy they had?
Yeah, we definitely had complementary backgrounds and different experiences in life. We had our different roles. And to your point earlier, like we agreed very early on, like we just have to make decisions. We have to have a rubric on how we're going to make decisions and move on, because the worst thing that can happen is you just get stuck in these cycles. And I think we stuck with that. Like we agreed to a framework and we worked through things. And that's why like setting deadlines and figuring out how we were going to make calls and figure out tiebreakers or whatever that was, like just kind of agreed to the rules of the road, if you will. And we stuck with it. And like I said, like, we're all still friends. It was great to work together. We certainly had very heated moments and tensions boiled over and stress was high. But at the end of the day, we knew what the North Star was. We always said, let's do right by the company. Let's figure that out, and agreed to some like operating principles up front, and it worked out great.
Yeah. And look, I think also if you're all in alignment all the time on everything, you're probably not doing it right. Like building a company successfully takes a lot of different thoughts and opinions, and pushing, you're not always right about everything. Other co-founders aren't always right about everything. So like pushing each other, obviously a really important piece of that.
Totally agreed. And we really embrace like a debate culture. Like good ideas could be challenged by anyone. Good ideas could be mentioned by anyone. You could debate it. You would, have vigorous conversations around things. And we like that. And we just always said, like, as long as you have a framework to get out of the debate, so you have to call and figure out who's going to do that. And, big embrace of Amazon's, disagree and commit. Let's make a decision. That's it.
Totally. Yeah. And we would talk a lot about just like strong opinions loosely held, right? It's like you have a strong opinion, but if someone makes a compelling argument, you can't just hold on to it because you want to be right. Cool. Well, look, so you guys aligned on Casper. You got CasperSleep.com. I'm sure one of the first things you did early on was like, hey, who's on Casper.com? Can we go and get that? Like, tell me a little bit more about just like the domain digital asset kind of journey you went on to eventually wind up on Casper.com.
Yes, we quickly figured out that a gentleman in Houston, Texas named Gary Casper had owned Casper.com since 19.
And you're from Houston, so got the hometown advantage.
Yeah, well, I don't know. He's a funny guy. He's a great guy. He like he did exactly what he said, which from the beginning we said, okay, let's reach out to him before we launch. Let's, do some of the games and figure it out and try to do the dance. And Gary wanted to buy a boat. And so Gary had a price for Casper.com, and he didn't change his price. And we couldn't buy it pre-launch. He tracked us obviously very closely, and he didn't change. He didn't jack up the price. He had his price from the beginning, and he didn't waver, and he was a man of his word, and he just did everything right by us. And it was a very smooth transaction, which you don't always get in this world.
No, you rarely do in this space.
Yeah. And, at the time it was a crazy amount of money, and we couldn't fathom paying what he wanted. And then we talked to our investors. We talked to other smart operators like Mark Lohr at Jet.com and others. And what should we do? And eventually we figured out that we're going to have to bite the bullet and buy Casper.com, post our Series A fundraise. And Gary was just always there. He's like, yeah, whenever you guys are ready, here's my price. Otherwise, I'm happy to just sit on it. I'm like, okay, that's fair.
I mean, boats aren't cheap, so I get it. But that also makes sense, right? It can be different if you're a consumer-facing brand versus if you're B2B versus whatever behind the scenes. You guys were pretty early on moving up the funnel, right? Radio, getting into billboards, out-of-home TV, right? I'm sure that played into the decision-making process too, right? It's can we have a Casper.com to put on this billboard versus the longer domain?
I mean, it did and it didn't. Yes, we would sit there, and again, this would be something we would debate and rationalize, but it's really not a logical kind of debate, in my opinion. You either believe that there's value in the brand holistically and how you bring it out or not. And yeah, I'm sure there's a price where it doesn't make sense, but the world, consumers are so inundated with everything. So any modicum of making something easier to remember or easier to access is likely worth it if you're trying to build something. And I actually think even in a B2B context, if someone has to go searching for a domain name, it's hard. And why make one more barrier for someone to find your business?
No, I think that's right.
If you have scaled ambitions for what you're going to do, and we did, then, we just always said, let's just do it right, build it right from the beginning, and make the investments that we need to make that we think will have long-term dividends.
The price, of course, needs to match the stage and the ambitions, right? Where it's because you can make that argument, and this happens a lot where I get people coming in very early and they're like, we believe in the brand, we believe in the need to have this premium.com, and sometimes that can make sense, but it's very rarely going to make or break your business and in the early stages. And so needing to balance that with hey, am I going to lay out cash that actually puts a dent in my runway for this? I think that can be a dicey decision versus you kind of graduate as you raise your A or your B or whatever, and earn the right to spend some of that money on maybe these things that are harder to quantify, but you feel in your gut are a good decision.
I think that's right. It's a tough call. It's not one that has a clear right or wrong answer depending on your company and your situation. And I think a lot of it has to do with your just general disposition as a founder and as investors, right? So we would make a decision like that with our partners. At the time, our partners were Tony Florence with NEA and Ben Lear from Lear Hippo Ventures. And we're lucky that we were all aligned. We want to take a really big swing with Casper. We're not doing this to build a modest outcome or a lifestyle business. We want to build a category defining generational brand and business. And if that's the lens that you're all aligned on, then yeah, take a swing, buy the assets that are going to pay off long-term, do it earlier than later, and show the world that you're serious about doing that. But very smart investors could have said, no, let's extend runway, let's use it for operating capital, let's hire more, let's spend more on marketing, whatever. And that could be right too. But for us, we're lucky that we wanted to do it. We had support of our partners, and we got to take a big swing with everything that we were doing.
And not that you can't do it if you don't have the support of your board or your investors, but it definitely feels a lot better knowing that everyone's on the same page, and you're not just turning that money over into an asset where people are like, this isn't worthwhile.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend to CEOs to cut mid 6 or 7 figure checks without the support of their board. I mean, yeah, you could do it, but I don't know.
It depends how much conviction you have. Yeah. Um, and and so you guys were like a year or two in at that point.
No, I mean, we were lucky that like things just clicked when we launched. So I think we launched April 22nd of 2014. We raised a pretty large A round that summer. So I want to say like June of 2014. And I think we got the domain later that year. So within the first 9 months of being live.
Gotcha. But again, yeah, I mean, that's also, you guys also like really hit the ground running. I remember like out of the gate, Casper was everywhere, and certainly in New York City.
Yeah, we were lucky. I mean, that was a time where like DTC brands could get big. I think we did $1 million in sales in like our first month, something like that. We raised a $13.1 million A round within a few months of being in existence. So like you could invest for the long term. You could invest to take big swings. The environment's very different right now. The playbooks are very different. So it was a moment in time, and it was something that we were trying to figure out the playbook as we went. And, there were other early DTC companies doing very cool things that we learned from, and we wanted to do our own thing as well. So
no, I remember, I was leading growth at Barkback at that point, and just seeing what you guys are doing, especially with out of home. And I was like, who are these guys? This is pretty awesome. And then I met Terry and other folks from the team who were crushing it. Awesome. I'm curious your thoughts, like, and I know it's hard to say and it's hard to quantify, but like, do you think it was worthwhile in the long run to make that investment on the domain side?
Yeah, no brainer. I think if you want to be a brand, and people talk a lot about like building brands and what a brand is, etc. Like to me, a brand was always just the collection of touch points that you have with your customer or potential customer. And your domain name is certainly one of the touch points. And when they go to your website, seeing your domain name is a big touch point, or seeing the domain name on an ad or hearing it on an ad. And so, we always just said like, what are the things that we can control, and let's optimize that. So we would always, plot out every point in the customer journey and try to make each point as delightful and on brand and special and enticing as possible. And, some of that was obvious, like with the box and the unpacking, and that ended up going way more viral than we would have ever expected. And we didn't do it.
Yeah, I remember those videos launched where it's like the expansion videos when people open the bags, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the domain name, it's hard to quantify. It's not like people are like, oh, well, you were at .com, so I went to you versus .co or something like that. Like, can't really quantify it, but it's another one of those touch points, and the collection of those touch points are what your brand becomes. And I think we have and had a very special brand, and we wanted to keep reinforcing that to the highest degree we could.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, like, as we talked about before, I think balancing some of the larger dollar like brand investments with where you are, stage, runway, what the fundraising environment looks like, et cetera. And also, more recently, it's kind of been chatter, I feel like, in the startup community, but more recently, it's kind of like you can buy some of these more premium domains, but do them on longer term purchase plans, right? Where it's like we can spend $2 million on a domain, but if we split it out over 60 months, if it's not really working for us, we can always just stop paying and go back to, the slightly non-premium version that is free. So there's different ways to play it, but being thoughtful about stage, obviously really important there.
Yeah, I agree. Or like lease to own structures where you're leasing it for a certain period of time, and you have an option to buy it when you do raise your next round or when you do hit an inflection point. And so I think domain owners can be open to creative solutions, and founders should always be thinking about creative ways to solve whatever can add value to the company.
All right. Well, Philip, I appreciate the time. Oh, I forgot to say it early on, but for all of our listeners, I'd say up to the 10 people that are watching, remember to, my kids say, follow us on YouTube and smash that subscribe button. And Philip, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach out if they want to learn more about Montauk or anything you guys are working on?
Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn or Philip at montaucclimate.com.
Awesome. Great domain name.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks again for joining, and have a good one, Phil.
Thanks, Rob. Great to be here.